Welcome to Office Hours July 2024 edition. We are so happy to see y'all. Um, Things have changed since we last gathered together. Summer has arrived with full force. We've got those hot temperatures going outside. If y'all have been outside working in your garden, I'm sure you've noticed that the weeds know that it's summer as well. So everything should be kind of hitting full force, getting going. And we were just talking before we got started that we can really tell that the vegetable gardens are starting to come into their own because we've got quite a few vegetable and fruit questions today. So we kind of anticipated this. So we're looking forward to answering a lot of questions for y'all and just having fun while we're doing it. Now, something that I think that we failed to do last time, and we didn't do a really good job of introducing ourselves like as we moved from session to session. So, panelists, let's just say hey really quick. Tell everybody what your name is, what county you're in, and just say hey to everybody. And that way, once we get to that section, they'll kind of be familiar with who's talking. Does that sound good? Okay, I'm Celeste Scott. I'm the Horticulture Extension Specialist, and I'm over here in the Western region in Jackson. Seth,
Hey y'all, I am Seth Whitehouse and I am the extension agent in Anderson County.
Anna,
Hey, I'm Anna Duncan, and I'm the curriculum specialist in plant sciences.
Mr. Lee,
Good morning, everyone. I'm Lee Rumble. I'm a county agent here in Knoxville, Tennessee, Knox County, and also an ISA certified arborist, and I work in commercial horticulture.
Taylor,
Hi, I'm Taylor Reeder. I am the horticulture agent in Williamson County. I do residential and commercial horticulture.
Kelly,
Good morning. I'm Kelly Dozier. I'm the horticulture agent in Murray County.
Bob,
Good morning. I'm Bob Avery. I'm a horticulture program assistant in Robertson County.
retired longtime agent. Don't let him fool you with that title. Greg,
Greg Upchurch. I'm just an old agricultural agent in Cumberland County.
an oldie but goodie. Rachel,
I'm Rachel Howe. I'm in the Western region in Lauderdale County.
and Natalie.
Hey, I'm Natalie Baumgartner coming to you from, at this exact moment, Knoxville, Tennessee. So we have an opportunity to travel and we hope to get a bunch of your questions from across the state.
We're going to start with ornamentals and turf, and then we're going to work our way into those fruit and vegetable questions. So, any of our panelists, y'all, even if you weren't the one to answer this specific question that came into the database, if you have thoughts on the answer, right, this is open communication. So for sure, just let us know and don't be afraid to add your information to the discussion, if that makes sense. Okay, so I'm gonna kick us off. Are we ready? Lee, Taylor, whoever else might want to pitch in on woodies. Okay.
Yep.
Starting on woodies. So we have a question here from Hamilton County. It says, I have 3 Cryptomeria japonicas planted along the side of my house. We recently started a home addition, and the bottom 6 feet of the limbs on one side of each tree was removed to allow for the equipment to access the backyard. How will the trees respond to having the remaining branches removed? Thoughts?
Yeah, so I guess I can take it, Celeste. I'm happy to.
I'll
The
pull a
tree
picture
will.
up. I've got a picture, so I'll
Yeah,
pull
that'd
that
be
up for us.
great. That'd be great. So, the tree will respond, really quite fine. I'm not overly worried about overall tree health by just moving or removing just a few lower branches off of a tree. Now, one good kind of mental note to keep in mind when we are elevating the lower canopy of trees is we never want to go more than 1/3 of the total height of that tree. So for a 60-foot tree, we're talking no higher than 20 feet. And I would even argue that's kind of pushing it. But um, I think here what's more important to realize is that with any coniferous evergreen, so I'm thinking cedars, junipers, arborvitaes, hemlocks, spruce, fir, pines, and even Leland cypress trees, they develop their new growth from the terminus of the branches, the ends of the branches. And if we ever take that off, that's why we've seen a lot of times when people will tip or top the ends of a branch on a coniferous evergreen, oftentimes you wind up losing that branch all the way back to the trunk. So be very careful about tipping or topping the ends of, again, those conifer evergreens. That means a cone bearing evergreen tree. So I'm not overly worried about the cuts. The cuts look like they were executed extremely well. They didn't tear into the bark. What did startle me, Celeste, on this one, and you probably saw it as I was zooming in, is that lower buttress root. Goodness, something definitely drove over that lower buttress root. And I know you've dropped the picture, but if you
I
were to
can pull it
zoom
back
in at
up.
that,
I'll pull it back up.
okay,
Yeah.
yeah, so zoom into that lower trunk section, and clearly something, a tire or something has hit that buttress root. And while it's not an immediate problem, that is major cause for concern for me right there. Exactly. Now that that internal wood's exposed, I mean, it's going to be subjected to the elements, rain, snow, of course, wood decay, fungi. So what we like to do is set up tree protection zones prior to construction. And in cases like this, where maybe we have to drive equipment over existing tree root systems, a good 6-inch, 8-inch layer of wood chips can be extremely beneficial to help reduce compaction and can even protect from mechanical injuries like this. So I'm more worried about that wound at the base of the tree long term than I am the pruning cuts.
Good. Some definitely certainly want to make sure that they know that those trees are not going to sprout out new limbs from where they cut
Exactly.
off those other ones. That's for
That's right.
sure.
That's
Um,
right.
but sometimes, we have to do what we have to do. We have to have some construction done. We've got to get that equipment back there. So definitely understand the reasoning behind what we had to do there, but wouldn't be the typical way that we would manage that particular type of tree. So excellent answer. Excellent question. Excellent answer. Okay.
Yeah.
So let's see what's next on our list. We've got this question comes in from Shelby County, so a Western region question. We've got a 10-year-old silver maple. They say it's about 10 inch diameter at breast height. It's splitting at the base. They are wondering how do they treat. They don't really want to lose the tree, and I actually haven't looked at the picture on this one. Lee, do you want to start us off while I pull up
Yeah,
the picture, and then we
I
can
sure
think
can.
about things to add?
Yeah, so this one I kind of defaulted to, having an on-site visit with a certified arborist. And the reason that was, y'all, is just because of the close proximity of the house. I do see the house just, 12, 15 feet away there, maybe. Now, of course, trying to identify what caused this wound is always going to be a challenge for us, post wounding. But because it is at the lower base of the tree, I suspect either mulching practices, maybe of years past, because I mean, while this isn't overly excessive amounts of mulch, I don't see a really well pronounced root flare. I start to see it, but that means
Right.
that planting depth may have been a little bit low. It may have gone in the ground a little deeper than we wanted it to. And that moisture oftentimes will hold against the bark, and that can cause situations like this. Now, certainly a weed whacker, a stream
That's what I
trimmer,
was gonna
whatever.
say.
Yeah,
Mhm.
that's very possible as well prior to the mulch being there. And another thought that I had after thinking, we've had some pretty rough weather patterns the last 3 years. It's possible that this could be from frost cracking, Celeste,
Ah,
early in the spring as trees are waking up, those basically rapid expansion and contraction of those wood tissues early in the day, early in spring as we get nice warm temperatures during the day, but drop rapidly at night, that can retract and we can
mhm.
get some of that situation. Now, this one startles me because while the wound's at the base, as you look higher up that trunk, yeah, I see that splitting. So
Yes.
that makes me question, is this a much bigger issue? So
Mhm.
definitely because of the proximity, go to treesaregood.org, find a local certified arborist in your area, have them come out, do an on-site visit. Maybe they can dig away at that and look and see for girdling roots, but there's no fixing it, Celeste, as you know. Taylor, do you want to expand on how to repair wounds or?
Well, we don't really repair tree wounds. They
Exactly.
compartmentalize themselves. They don't
There you
heal.
go.
They cut themselves off from the rest of the tree. So I was also concerned by the extra cracking we see going up the tree. And I would wonder if that bark might be dead underneath that and causing that cracking. So it makes me concerned that there's a much bigger, like you said, Lee, internal issue we're not necessarily seeing immediately.
Yeah.
And definitely consulting with an arborist. I don't like having trees within 10 foot of a house. It at least, and that tree's pretty close and we don't see the rest of it. I don't know really how big it is. But being that close to the house, it's definitely a risk. Getting an arborist out there, one that can do the that's track certified, that can do that tree risk assessment. And arborists have tools that we don't necessarily have. They have resistographs and things like that where they can really look internally at what's going on with that tree. A lot of times we can only tell you what's going on externally and what we can see. So definitely consulting with a certified arborist for sure with that one.
Exactly. And one thing I didn't mention, sorry, and I'll stop, Celeste, is
No,
on
that's
these
what we're here for.
on these wounds, one thing I do want to note, and I think most of us know this at this point, but no spray paints, no wound sealants, right? So I always joke with my clientele, how long have trees been around? And it's about 400 million years. How long have pruning sealants been around? It's, about since the mid 80s, maybe. So leave the wound exposed, let the tree do its own thing as far as compartmentalization.
Yes.
So Celeste, if
yes.
I could, Taylor and Leah both used the term compartmentalize. And I think the first image with that buttress root damage and the second one there tied together hand in hand. Explain a little bit what you're talking about, the it compartmentalizing and how that dies up into that tree and how the tree grows over that, hollow trees, etc.
Yeah. So back in what was it? I think the 60s, Dr. Alex Shigo is the one who coined the term CODIT, CODIT, which is compartmentalization of decay in trees. And what this is basically a conceptual understanding of how trees compartmentalize or close their wounds. So trees immediately set up boundary response zones, and at the site of a wound, they're going to close both above and below the site of that wound first. That's the first response by a tree. And this makes sense because trees are vascular systems that run up and down. So if we have an infection or an injury, that tree wants to limit the spread of disease or decay up and down first. The second response is to close internally to that wound itself. That's the second wall that we'll set up. So that decay pocket does not go deep into the canopy. Now, or excuse me, into the trunk. Now, we know that wall is very weak, and that's oftentimes why we do see trees actually create large cavities in the trunks because that wall oftentimes will fail. The third response of the CODIT model is that it closes the sides of those wounds, lateral closure. And then the final and fourth response is what makes trees so amazing. It is to keep growing. So they're going to try and connect those vascular tissues, that vascular cambium, back by developing that reaction wood. We call it wound wood oftentimes in the trade. And if it's a small enough wound, trees are extremely successful at this. If it's a long vertical strike or a injury by a car, Greg, it's never going to close a large wound of that size. We really want to keep those wounds as small and as circular as we can when we're making this.
Yeah. And Lee kind of mentioned it with the last picture and saying they made proper pruning cuts. Making those good pruning cuts will encourage that compartmentalization and the callus tissue to form and close up those wounds so that they are not open to the elements. Flush cuts against the trunk, bad pruning cuts that rip the bark, those aren't going to create that healthy callus tissue that's going to close up that wound.
Exactly.
Excellent. I've learned so much. I just feel like I was, reading it from an encyclopedia. You guys have that down. Thanks so much. That was wonderful, wonderful information. Okay. So let's see what's next on our list. We're heavy with tree questions. Oaks. We're moving on to oaks. So this question came in from Monroe County, but I know that we're getting this similar question all across the state. So they're asking, are there any diseases that we're aware of that are affecting the health of pin oaks or just oaks in general? They do specifically say in East Tennessee, but I feel like we can expand this to the entire state of Tennessee. They didn't have a photo to accompany this. It's just kind of a general question. Maybe they've been seeing some things happening around their neighborhood, around their subdivision or town, and are just kind of wanting to get a little more information on what they should be expecting from oaks as far as any kind of pests or disease. Does that make sense? Okay, so I feel like there is an obvious one. It's bacterial leaf scorch. That is primarily affecting pin oaks in more urban type residential settings. This is not a disease that you would go out, into a wooded forested area and be like, oh, well, we've got, bacterial leaf scorch on only our pin oaks. That's strange. So that kind of tips me off that these trees are under a type of stress that they are not usually exposed to in their native environment. And it's making them more susceptible to this bacterial leaf scorch disease. Um, it's going to look exactly like it sounds, where we've got that burning or scorching that first develops along the edges of leaves and works its way inward. Lee and Taylor, whoever else, y'all can add your thoughts as well. I've seen this seemingly bring a tree to its demise in a short period of time, but I've also seen trees that have had bacterial leaf scorch for years and years, and they are just on a slow decline where that canopy is thinning year after year. It gets thinner and thinner and looks twiggier and twiggier. So, any more what are others thinking and seeing with bacterial leaf scorch?
Yeah, I would say that that's probably the number one disease we're seeing in red oaks in general, but pin oaks specifically are very susceptible to it. And it's one of the reasons we are kind of moving away from recommending pin oaks in landscape situations just because of that issue. And, when we look at the health of trees in a landscape, landscapes are stressful situations. I mean, landscapes are not natural habitats usually that plants like to grow in. So they're always under some sort of stressor. And anytime a plant, whether it's a vegetable, a tree, a flower, is stressed, they're more susceptible to disease and insect pests. So putting them in a stressful situation and potentially not planting them correctly, not watering during times of drought, things like that can lead to stress, which then opens them up to these disease and pest problems. Once you have bacterial leaf scorch, unfortunately, there's no cure. It's terminal, and it just depends on the tree how long it will take for it to succumb to that. Things you can do for your tree: keeping it well mulched out to at least the drip line, 2 to 3 inches deep of mulch. Don't pile it up against the trunk like Lee said. No volcano mulching, please. But using good mulching practices, good watering practices in times of drought, because even mature trees in times of drought, even though they have a large root system, may need that supplemental watering. I know, especially with our clay soils, when they dry up, they can turn into a brick. And any rainfall that we get can sometimes just roll off. So having those good mulching practices, good watering practices can keep your tree a little bit healthier. But yes, bacterial leaf scorch is definitely a big issue in pin oaks and red oaks in general.
Yeah. And honestly, Celeste and Taylor pretty much covered everything. The only thing I would talk about is spread. So this is an issue. It's a bacterium. And basically, it's blocking the water conducting vessels, the xylem cells in a tree. And as a tree, again, we just talked about compartmentalizing. The tree's trying to close off these cells. Well, guess what? That limits the amount of water and sugars that ultimately are going to flow through that canopy. So it's spread by leafhoppers and spittle bugs and plants that basically jump from tree to tree. But there's also been some evidence that when we have root grafting between two trees, one infected and one not, we can also get transmission of this issue, this bacterial leaf scorch, the bacterium, through root grass. So again, another argument against monocultures, right? All right.
Yeah,
for sure.
Yeah. And the one thing too we may talk about is don't assume it's bacterial leaf scorch immediately.
Yes. Yes.
I've seen a tremendous amount of jumping oak galls this year, which will lead to very necrotic tissues, little pustules on the undersides of leaves. I've had a lot of that where we're seeing that marginal necrosis and leaf drop. But bacterial leaf scorch is pretty easy to identify, but you can't do it just off of visual symptoms. You've got to lab test it, but generally you're going to see the margins start to recede. You'll see that necrotic area. You'll often get a yellow halo between infected and unaffected tissues, and oftentimes the midrib will stay green on those leaves. So
awesome.
Yeah.
I hope that we get. Go ahead, Taylor. Go ahead.
I was just gonna say yes, mimicking symptoms. I've seen drought stress in oaks that looks a lot like bacterial leaf scorch. So make sure you're not just making that assumption, you're having it tested, going to someone who knows exactly what it looks like.
Yeah.
And with that being said, sometimes we don't even notice the symptoms of this leaf scorch until we get later into the season, like late summer. And our first thought usually is, oh, it's just really dry. It's just really hot. So, just kind of be keeping that in the back of your mind as well. And there are several other things that we could talk about with oaks. Like in the spring, we see a lot of oak leaf blister. We see, I don't know about y'all, but I mean, I've been seeing instances of, just oak decline, which is more like a decline complex, which is aggravating because there's no one thing that we can say is causing the decline. But maybe we can talk more about oak decline in another session. That would be a really fun topic to talk about. Greg, did you want to add something before we go to a next question?
I was going to ask Lee and/or Taylor to expand. I've seen several questions come into my office about the leaf galls, and he mentioned that and seeing leaf drop on those. How concerned should we be about some of these galls we see? And I think we touched on this the last time. Those people in areas of the state that are getting hit from cicada damage. You want to touch on any of that? Both those very timely.
That's a good point. That is very timely. We actually looked at some cicada damage at a horticulture agent in service yesterday, and it's pretty distinctive. So you're going to see that damage on the underside of those limbs. They'll look like little slits. It'll look like a cut and a skip and a cut and a skip and a cut and a skip. And that is where they have used their ovipositor to insert their eggs into the undersides of those limbs. And those eggs are in there. I mean, there's not a lot we can do about that. I don't feel like there are many control measures, but we need to keep in mind what happened this year so that next spring, when we start seeing like twiggy branches on the ends of a lot of our ornamental plants, be vigilant, look for those ovipositor scars, and just know that that was where they inserted their eggs, that larva fed. And so we're going to get some twiggy, branch tips next year. That's going to kind of be the result of that. I don't know. What else do we want to add?
This is something that's been happening for years and years and years. It's not a new phenomenon. Cicadas have been emerging and laying their eggs inside the tips of branches for hundreds and hundreds of years. So it's not something to be concerned about. The tree will drop those. They will be fine. So don't be too concerned. We've seen a lot in our hardwood species, especially see it in oaks and hickories and ashes and things like that. But if you want that cycle to continue, if you don't like the aesthetics of it, I understand. But if you want that cycle to continue, we want that larva to drop down to the ground and burrow back into the ground. So removing the whole stems and twigs. Now, I'm not an entomologist, so Seth, our bug person, may be better able to speak on this. But leaving those on there for that larvae to drop down is a good practice if we want to continue that cycle. And something interesting I've noticed, and I could be very wrong about this, is like in my neighborhood, we didn't have very many cicadas. And my neighborhood was built in 2017. So I'm sure they scraped a lot of that soil out of there that probably contained the cicadas. And I'm seeing more severe cicada damage in areas that are more undisturbed, like on the sides of highways and things like that. I see them more a heavy presence of that cicada damage in those areas where the soil hasn't been disturbed in 13, 17 years.
Yeah, couldn't agree more. And that will oftentimes, the cicada damage does lead to flagging. That's when we see a short section of the tip of the branch that just suddenly dies. If you do look, you'll see the evidence of that. But Greg, to touch on your leaf gall, I worry about this much about leaf galls. Very, 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 very little. If you think about what the impact of a tiny leaf gall is on the total surface area of a tree and all that foliage, it's very, very minimal. Now, yes, if you get enough galls on individual leaves, they'll coalesce and create necrotic dead tissues. And sometimes those leaves will fall to the ground. But we've got to remember, as we progress through the season, trees are allocating resources, and oaks late in the season are going to be putting energy into buds, into acorns, and ultimately leaf senescence, leaf drop. So at that point, they're kind of giving up on that leaf tissue. It's not real important that they keep protecting leaf tissues, especially in a hot, dry, windy year like we've had this year right here. That plant's giving up and it's thinking long term. Okay, we better get off of one.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I know. We've been having fun. Lots of good information, but we can always touch back on that. So keep sending us your tree questions, your ornamental questions, and we certainly will have fun answering those. We only had one kind of turf related question come in this month, and it was really more focused on weed control. So I'll just mention it briefly. The weed of concern is creeping wood sorrel, which can be difficult, even more difficult than yellowwood sorrel to control. They've been doing their best at pulling this up. They're having issues with it in their tall fescue lawns, which kind of adds another layer of difficulty there on control. So just wondering like what some of their options are. They included their soil information. From glancing at that briefly, everything looks in order. Their pH is in an acceptable range. Their nutrient levels are, within those allowable ranges as well. And they asked about timing and management recommendations potentially for post-emerge as well as pre-emerge. And so when it comes to pre-emerge options for this, barricade, dimension, and pendulum are go-tos, and they're going to be adequate for this situation as well. You may want to look at a fall application and then a split spring application. That's a potential to kind of stretch out your coverage there for those periods when the seeds would be germinating. And then we have lots of products that are available for post-emerge control. We just have to be a little careful, make sure we read the labels really clearly, because if you are I believe from the way they phrase the question, they have both warm season turf and cool season turf, and we can't use those products at the same rates usually on the cool season grasses. So be really careful, make sure we read our labels, but some things that are easily accessible to homeowners that would be effective for post-emerge control for that are Q4 Plus and Speed Zone, and those are multi-action products. So they've got about 4 different active ingredients, and they really are more effective on some of these tougher to control weeds than say your typical bonide weed beater, which is a 2A product. So they've added in a more chemistry that's going to help with those harder to control weeds. Okay,
Yeah,
so
and
go ahead.
I would say one quick thing on the pre-emerge applications, be careful if you've got cool and warm season, especially if you've got fescue and you're planning on reseeding, be really careful with those
Yes.
pre-emerge applications, because you could put a pre-emerge down and you're going to kill that seed that you put down to seed. So make sure you're reading that label. It talks about reseeding after putting down pre-emerge. And also one of the fun things about this wood sorrel is its seed case looks like a little okra. And its seeds are explosively dehiscent, which is like one of my favorite terms. I just love that. But they explode and those seeds shoot out like 10, 15 feet. So trying with any weed, trying to not let it get to that flowering, fruiting seed stage to begin with, getting it when it's young can be really helpful with stopping that seed bed from being created.
Awesome.
A couple of things regarding anytime controlling weeds. First and foremost, and I think the homeowner here looked to address this, why do we have that weed problem to begin with? Start with your other management practices: mowing height, moisture, site, enough sunlight for that turf grass to grow, compacted soils, adding organic. Let's start with fertility and focus on growing the turf grass first. Then second, look at chemistry if you need that to adjust. If you're using those auxin mimics, our broadleaf herbicides, remember those basically grow plants to death. So you need optimum growing conditions, adequate moisture. Like right now, I wouldn't be recommending spraying anything anyway, but in a situation like right now where we had really high drought, if that was spring or that was fall, anytime that we were trying to put down those auxin herbicides, you would be spending money and not getting anywhere near the results that you wanted. So, do your studies on what you're using, and don't just do those revenge sprays, those that make you feel better, but don't necessarily do anything to control the weeds that we're trying to control.
Awesome. Good, thorough answers. I like every angle we took to that question. And that can be applicable for so many, really all of our weed questions, right? So definitely a good approach. Okay, so